Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined today by two excellent guests. Firstly by Councillor Michelle Campbell. Michelle, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks very much for having me back.
And on the other side of me we have James Dornan MSP. James, how are you doing?
I'm good, Kenny. Always nice to be here.
Grand. Well, it's great to have both of you. And we do have a lot to talk about today, but we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. Yesterday, this is obviously from 2 p.m, as of 2 p.m. yesterday, today's figures will be published at 2 p.m. today. There were 350 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland, and sadly, there were 3 new reported deaths of people who had tested positive. As of now, there are a total of 718,954 people in Scotland have been tested. Of these, 694,828 were confirmed negative, 24,126 were positive. There were 64 people in hospital last night, 9 of whom were in intensive care. And that takes the total now of patients who have tested positive for the virus who have died to 2,505. So the first thing I think we should need to talk about today is this rise we've seen in the number of cases and really sadly the number of deaths we've seen in the last week or two. James, if I could come to you first, what do you think is going on here? I mean, we've heard several explanations from it's schools going back is increasing the spread, more people going back to work. But there's also questions about whether testing has been up to scratch, whether restrictions have been lifted too early. What's been your feeling about what's behind this?
The First Minister made it clear that there was a likelihood of the increase of coronavirus when schools opened and when we went back to work and life get back to something more approaching normal. It was about how we balance one against the other. There's been a greater increase than one would hope, and that's why there's been restrictions put in places like the city of Glasgow. So it's very difficult. We look at, I don't want to start comparisons earlier on, but I think that the First Minister has, with her strong actions, she's kept it lower than it possibly could have been when we started to go back to work, when schools were going back, when people were out using public transport in a way that they hadn't been before. And we're coming into that time of the year where I think we all feared that there was going to be an increase in the virus, and we're now facing it. We just need to make sure that people get on board with the idea of wearing masks, keeping distance and social distancing, and doing all the things that are being asked, because the things that we're doing in Scotland are being driven as much as they possibly can by the science.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, we've seen obviously the big protest in London this week against lockdown, and we've seen a lot more of people saying, masks are a waste of time. The pandemic is maybe not a hoax, but being drastically over exaggerated. Do you think that message is getting through to people, and that's maybe why some people are less inclined to take things as seriously as they maybe need to?
Well, I think it's important to recognise the difference between the messages that we've been getting from our First Minister. She's been very responsible about the way that she's been making that message. That the public health aspect of the crisis has been well managed by our First Minister. However, when it comes to Boris, we've seen that there has been clear issues about the way that he has had double standards about the way that he's been expressing the issue. It's really socially irresponsible for these protesters to be saying this. People are still dying. I have been working on the front line during this crisis. I've been in the full caboodle, the full PPE, having to deliver care to people who are very frightened and worried that they're going to get this virus above and beyond the stress that they're already dealing with in their healthcare needs.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, on that note, you're a nurse, as we know. What's the feeling in the NHS just now? How are your colleagues reacting when they see things like this protest?
I think that it's very disheartening. Anyone that I know of that's had to deal with end of life care for people who've been in this circumstance, I myself have had to help constituents who have not been able to see their loved ones before they passed away, and it's been heartbreaking for them. As a nurse, as a doctor, as a physio, as a member of the domestic staff, it doesn't matter which line you're on for the healthcare of this. Our care assistants and social care in particular have always had a really tough time with people that they get to know, because these places are their homes. And so for them to see individuals being so brazen and sort of having an attitude about this, I think it's almost like a willingness that if we say it doesn't exist and it doesn't, then it's okay and that everything can get back to normal. People need to understand this is a pandemic. That's the exact word. It's a pandemic. We've never seen anything like this in any of our lifetimes, and it's going to take time for us to recover. And we do have issues, I think, in general in modern society, that we're so used to the instant gratification of things. We're used to being able to get credit. We're used to being able to get things, instantaneously. You buy a meal now, you can put it in a microwave. So this is something that takes time. It requires the science, and as the First Minister has said, she will be led by the science as to the approach that we will take as a nation.
Yeah. Now, James, there are people, and we do have to kind of have some sympathy for it, for especially young people, desperate to see their pals, desperate to not be kind of cooped up in the house the way we were at the beginning of lockdown. The police have reported having to break up lots of house parties, and that's one of the reasons that restrictions on gatherings have been reintroduced. Do you have any sympathy with people in that kind of position?
I've got a granddaughter at 23, a grandson at 21. I've probably got the ages wrong, but it's round about there. So I've got a great deal of sympathy, and I know what they were like during the first lockdown, where they were great, but it was telling on them. They were missing their friends, they were doing all these Zoom parties and stuff like that, and it's not the same. So yes, I've got a great deal of sympathy for them, but they have to realise, as Michelle quite rightly says, this is a pandemic. This is something that hopefully they will never see again in their lifetime. Once we've got through this, and they have to make sacrifices just now for the future. It is difficult. They have to take advantage of whatever opportunities they've got just now, and just accept that they can't have the parties the way they used to have, and they can't go to the clubs the way they used to, and just get used to a new life for the next few months.
Yeah. Of course, the other question is why maybe some of the messages that are coming out from government are not cutting through quite as well as we might hope. How big an issue do you think it is having the media not necessarily making a clear distinction between what the rules are down south, what the rules are here? People kind of questioning the rules, blurring things. How big a problem do you think that has been?
This is the most serious crisis we've certainly faced, the country's faced, certainly since the end of the Second World War. And it should be a united message. We should be trying to make sure that the message, this is Scotland, we have a government that's responsible for Scotland, and the media in Scotland should be getting behind that government in this case to make sure that there's a fixed message. The Parliament is there for, if there's any disagreements about the way the government's going about this, then that's Parliament's decision. But if the government makes a decision, the media has got a responsibility to stick behind them. I know that we're going to come on to talk about it, but the BBC nonsense of backing down, first of all trying to stop the briefings at a time when coronavirus is getting worse, then backing down and saying that they're going to have other people's views on it. That's not what we want. We want the views of the government that are led by the scientists. One view in terms of, this is what the government's asking you to do, this is the reasons why we're trying to do it. If they want to bring on other health professionals or other scientists, then that's great. But please don't politicise these briefings.
Yeah. Well, James, you have pretty much scooped me there on what I was about to ask next. So, Michelle, I'll come to you on that. As James said, this week we've seen the BBC say they were going to stop broadcasting the briefings regularly. Then they've made a U-turn on that, but now they're saying that, as James said, there's going to be punditry attached to it from other political figures. How big a problem do you think that whole BBC debacle has been?
It's huge. It's incredibly irresponsible. Like, I go back to saying the same point, and I know it sounds like I'm banging on about it, but we're in a pandemic, and saying things as irresponsible as this and making a political football out of it is exactly the same problem that we've faced for decades within our NHS. This is why in an independent Scotland we're aiming for a national care service, because we need to rip off those plasters and make sure that it actually delivers for people. The First Minister herself had said, during lockdown, that difficult decisions have had to be made about lockdown, exactly, for example, healthcare, what we're able to deliver within that. We've got obviously a percentage of cancer treatments that are going on at the moment, and those services are up and running again, and it's great to see. But if we're enforced with another lockdown situation, what's going to happen to those services again? What other difficult circumstances are our country going to be faced with? And then what are then the further ramifications? I think that the BBC have been very irresponsible about the way they went about this, and don't realise that you might throw that pebble, but there's going to be a ripple effect, and that I cannot support.
Mm-hmm. The BBC obviously has come in for a lot of criticism, and I know a lot of people reacted really strongly to this. Do you think the opposition parties have any sort of point about how this has kind of promoted the profile of the First Minister, or do you think there's just that is just politicization of the issue?
I think it's politicalisation of the issue. The First Minister has been very transparent about the way that she's been dealing with COVID-19. I'm sorry, but if you get advance notice of a statement and you praise and thank that in the chamber, but then you have nothing but to chastise in the press, it's like, where do you actually stand on representing people? If we look back right at the beginning, the holier than thou commentary from the opposition has been, oh yes, we won't politicise COVID-19. It's important that we take steps forward to make sure that as a nation we are together on this and we go forward. Something as simple as the Prime Minister not having a COVID meeting since May, despite the fact there's now been calls for it to be looked at again, since we are, well, according to him, we're already in the second wave of this pandemic. So where is the consistency from their side? And why, if we are forced to be part of this union and, we are doing our bit, we're saying we respect the outcome of that vote. When it comes to this is not political. We are trying to look after all our communities across the whole of the nation, as take that four-nation approach, but they're the ones that broke their promises on that, not us. So they need to actually hang their heads in shame at the way that they're conducting themselves and get back on the horse, as to say, and get on with the job of making sure that everyone is represented, to make sure that the inequalities that we already have to deal with are not further inflicted upon with the distress of COVID-19.
Mm. And James, when we compare Scotland with the rest of the UK, or rather, strictly speaking, with England in this scenario, nobody forced Boris Johnson and his government to stop doing daily briefings, but that's been used against the First Minister, that she has kept doing it, and it's been, described as an SNP party political broadcast. But now we're seeing that in order to balance that, we're potentially going to be having political pundits commenting on the First Minister's words. But it seems very, very unlikely that the SNP and Labour and the Lib Dems would get a chance to offer punditry directly on a UK government briefing. Do you think there's a problem in the BBC specifically of not recognising that kind of parity of esteem between the First Minister and the Prime Minister?
Oh, the BBC have no problem in not recognising the parity of esteem. They're more than happy to go along with that line. They do not see the Scottish Parliament as being the equal of Minister. They believe that the rules that apply to us will not need to apply to them. There is no doubt at all. First of all, the Westminster government tell them can go and get lost. That there's no chance of the Labour Health Minister getting a chance to comment on the Matt Hancock's health statement or Boris Johnson's health statement or whatever it is, daily briefing. It's just not going to happen. There's another thing I would say about the FM's briefings that are politicised, that are tried to politicise it, have been the media. Every day, the FM goes up there and she gives a briefing strictly about COVID, the ridiculous questions, very often just trying to get that headline about differences between Scotland and England. So there's already been a politicisation of it, but it's never been from the government.
And what do you think the resolution to this is? I mean, is there a way that the BBC can kind of dig itself out of this hole? Because we've seen hundreds of thousands of people cancelled their licence fees in the last few weeks. And a lot of people, I mean, people I know who are not politically active, have no particular love for the First Minister, and still were furiously angry when they heard that these were going to be cut. Do you think this is a wound for the BBC is going to take a long time to recover from?
I think what they should do is that they've kind of dug themselves a hole, and I think that maybe the way to get out of it is to say that yes, what we meant was there'll be other points of view, but those other points of view will be people who deal with, COVID, or those that suffer from COVID, the likes of health professionals like Michelle and others, or from the care sector, whatever, but just showing the impact of what the First Minister has said over the past week or that day or whatever, but it should not be politicians, because as soon as you bring other politicians in, the whole structure of it changes, the whole meaning of it changes, and I just think that's completely unhealthy at a time where we should all be rallying around together.
And Michelle, on that note, do you think there's how do you see the BBC kind of coming back from this? Because it clearly has upset an awful lot of people.
Well, I think they've kind of drawn a line in the sand, and they've put their feet down, to be honest, about with the fact that they're allowing sort of the commentating on it. I do agree absolutely with what James was saying there about that's fine to have differing viewpoints. When you're managing a crisis, there will be different points of views about where a priority might be at a certain point in time, what needs to be looked at now. There is no sort of, the First Minister made it very, very clear that she's willing to listen to any of the concerns that then sort of transpire from that and have full upfront conversations in a public sphere to allow for people to feel reassured that everything's been looked at in a holistic manner. But the BBC allowing for just random commentary and for it to come from a political stance is just really morally repugnant, to be absolutely honest.
Well, we will obviously keep an eye on that. We'll have to see exactly how the BBC does progress on this. But we do want to move on a wee bit because there are other things to talk about. And the SNP today has once again called on the UK government to reconsider ending the furlough scheme, particularly in view of the fact that we may be entering increased lockdown measures again. James, I'll come to you first on this. This furlough scheme is due to end in October. It's already been reduced, so now it's only paying 60% of furloughed workers' wages. Why do you think the Tory government at Westminster is so determined that this has to end and that it can't be extended the way we've seen in so many other countries?
First of all, I think it's a tragedy that this is what they're planning to do, and it's a tragedy for two reasons. The main one is the impact it's going to have on people who are struggling to survive and who are trying to keep their businesses going or trying to keep their business in place so that they can restart when things get a bit better. But secondly, it's a stupid thing for the Conservative Party to be doing politically, because they've already spent that much money trying to keep things going for a period of time. They're now going to waste that effort if they withdraw the furlough scheme now. I think it's driven by two things. One is, I think there's a justifiable fear about costs. I mean, let's be honest here, they're building up a great deal of debt. But the other thing is, I think that right-wing element which runs the Conservative Party just now are just not happy at giving people money not to be working. I just think that it goes against the grain for them to be giving people furlough to stay in the house or to do whatever it is they're doing that is not doing their job, because that's just not what they believe in. They believe that if you can't work, then you don't eat. And I think that they're having a real struggle with that as well.
Yeah. Michelle, this furlough scheme, I mean, it's quite confusing because the Tories are known as being kind of pro-business, and yet they're effectively going to starve businesses out of business. They're not taking away the support while some businesses are still not going to be allowed to operate, which is just going to choke those businesses up. Do you see any logic behind this?
Well, unfortunately, my work that I do with Gavin Newlands, who's an MP, obviously, and he's taken the lead around the fire and rehire bill that he's proposed. And you can't speak about furlough without talking about the other. Now, for small businesses, James is absolutely right. It's strangling them and, not giving them many options. However, as ever with the Tories, they're not interested in small business. They're interested in the cronies that have big money in the game. So from what I can see of the transparency in this, by reducing furlough, it gives them an excuse to fire, restructure and rehire. And that means that workers' rights once again be jeopardised because the Tories want to look after their pals rather than look after the people that actually do the grafting. That, to me, is absolutely crystal clear from the work that I've been doing. And it's absolutely unacceptable. Any opposition members who have spoken about this have been trying to be loud and bold about it. But you don't see them sort of backing Gavin Newland's bill. You don't see them backing what Ian Blackford is saying, in relation to this. They just want to come up with their own synopsis on it. They really, really need to just get behind the messaging. This is absolutely going to cripple people across our communities. If you're talking about investment in people, paying that furlough will pay for itself in business. Because you see, if you treat people well, they will be loyal to you in your business, in the sector, and they will work harder because they know that you actually got a vested interest in them. And I feel it's absolutely disgraceful that they don't see that. And our government will continue to fight that, as will our SNP MPs down south.
And Michelle, just to kind of expand on that a wee bit, the Bank of England reported last week, I think it was their chief economist, said that there needed to be a structural adjustment to the economy, that there were businesses that we just need to accept aren't going to survive. But given that this is government saying you can't open, that does seem like it's not really the fault of the businesses. It's not that those businesses are somehow structurally unsound. They were doing fine before lockdown and are now being told, well, you get no help, but you're not allowed to do business. It's a really problematic idea, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just ludicrous. The business community is struggling. Even those that may seem secure before this point, the way businesses are structured and the way that they future forecast, they couldn't have forecast for the impact of COVID-19. A government is supposed to be there to support at times of crisis. You're supposed to look after your people. If that isn't your initial duty, then you're in the wrong place and you're definitely not representing the people that have elected you into office. The business community as a whole, I've been trying to speak to the government to try and have it be fairer. Look at the way that self-employed individuals have been treated within this. Even, for example, in my own constituency area, the Erskine Bridge Hotel, over 70 staff have received zero pay because of a clerical issue between ownership. It's absolutely ridiculous that there's not an exemption built in. And when you ask about a process of appeal, because this in essence is something that has been a real gripe and is an integral issue of the problem as well, because then it means when it comes to even considering extension, they're not properly looking at the data, is that they haven't built in a process of appeal. And to say that it's just because they are carrying a duty for the Queen, for me, goes beyond sort of any reasonable explanation. Rishi Sunak can stand there at the box and say that he's going to support businesses, protect staff, but he's not. His actions do not marry up with what the narrative is. And I think it's about time that people woke up and realised that this is not where our best interest is.
Well, we will obviously keep talking about COVID and furlough and all these things as the weeks go on. But there is another big issue hanging over British politics just now, and that is Brexit. We are still on apparently a fairly chaotic path. It does seem like no deal is becoming more and more likely. The last week or two, James, have been dominated by the internal market bill and the implications of that, what it says about the UK's position on international law, what it says about their position on devolution, and yet they deny that these are problems. What's been your perception of how this has all happened?
And I think the simple solution is that Dominic Cummings is a mass hypnotist. I think that he has completely hypnotised the Tory party into believing that there is nothing wrong with standing completely on your own with no friends whatsoever anywhere in the world, as long as him, Jacob Rees-Mogg and others are making money in this right-wing world that they fantasise about. The serious issue about it is that they have left themselves completely stranded. They've insulted everybody they've ever worked with, and I don't think that we can be talking about this being about the UK anymore. This is solely about England. They've made that quite clear in the internal market bill that they have no interest in Scotland. They will make Scotland do what they want. They're bringing in powers that can override the devolution process at any time. It's a terrifying piece of legislation that they're bringing in. From a nationalist point of view, I think that it's going to support the cause of independence, but while it's doing that, it's going to cause great hardship and problems for the people of Scotland. The whole Brexit process is going to be devastating for Scotland, devastating for the people of England, except for those at the top who are going to make plenty of money out of it.
And Michelle, this is not what was promised in 2016. There was, most of the senior Leave campaigners were all saying, no, we want to be in the single market. We want good trading relationships. We're still going to be friends with everybody, but it's going to open up new horizons. And yet we've seen in the last couple of weeks, the United States say there will be no trade deal if there is any threat to the Good Friday Agreement. The Irish lobby, obviously, has a lot of sway in the US. I think about some 100 million Americans or something think they're Irish. What do you think has happened to the kind of Leave brain trust? Gove, Johnson, all these kinds of people in that 4 years. Do you think there was always the intention to go down this path, or do you think they've kind of painted themselves into a corner with some of their rhetoric?
Well, I always say with such characters that they play the fool well. They put out a persona of being the jovial joker, that they don't know what they're talking about, that they don't know what they're doing to some extent, and allow that. And that comes back to Dominic Cummings in a way that he's managed to sort of pitch this vision to people down south who bought the narrative. They're only interested in their own stocks and shares, and it is going to be us, normal people, who are going to pay the price and brunt for that. It then fuels your frustration by the fact that Scotland didn't vote for this, and that we've been completely ignored as a country.
And what do you see coming next? I mean, we've got just 3 months really until the end of the year, when the transition period ends, and we are out of the EU. We're out of all the institutions. We're not affected by EU rule, or we're not under EU jurisdiction anymore, rather. Obviously, EU rules will still affect us in a whole lot of ways. What do you see happening over the next few months? Do you see any sort of chink of light that might give us some hope that things can work out better than they seem just now?
I think it's just going to give them increased reasons for poor decision making. I think that they will just put a blame on that. I think we're actually going to see an increased sort of racist narrative, to be absolutely honest. There's already misgivings about people seeking asylum, refugees, immigration. The terms are continually just punted about when they don't have an answer for anything. We've obviously seen it's the narrative this week sort of has went down a bit, but I'm sure that the minute that there's any conversation about what is the benefit of us leaving, keep in mind that the majority majority of people who voted for Brexit, when they were asked, when they polled just generically on the street, they said, oh, it's about closing our country and protecting our borders. So they play on that narrative all the time. Encouraging racism in a modern society in the UK is an absolutely disgraceful position to be had. I'm not surprised by it, to be absolutely honest. However, I'm sick fed up of it. I know I come across as angry and bold about it, but I mean, come on, why wouldn't I be? My whole life has been affected by the fact that people will sometimes just have that narrative, where it's like if they don't know what else to say, they'll just put it out that, it's about them, it's about, purity of the nation and rule Britannia. And that is more of what we're going to see in the next 3 months, and it's disgusting.
Yeah, James, I mean, on that front, we were told that this was all about being able to control our borders, and yet we were the only country in Europe during lockdown that didn't close its borders. What is going on in that Brexit mindset, that even the things that they said they were going to do, even when it seemed like they're the right thing to do, and something that even a lot of Remainers would have been quite supportive of, they refused to do? It's quite a difficult question to ask, but what's behind that kind of cognitive dissonance?
It's a very good question to ask. It's just a shame that I am not qualified to give the answer to what's inside those Brexit minds. During campaigns, their first reaction is to lie to get by the moment they're in. And I think that what happened during the Brexit campaign was they decided that the easiest lie to sell was £350 million a week you can spend in the NHS, or all that sort of blatant nonsense that they told us, just like they did in 2014 in the referendum. I don't know why they do the things they do. I honestly don't think there's a strategy, except for the strategy is to get to the end, get out with no deal, which I think has always been the strategy, and without thinking about what the impact on the country will be. Because, as I said earlier on, I do honestly believe that people like Rees Mogg, who have taken their businesses and built businesses outside of the UK, because that's where they can get the best deal. Others who have got dual passports to make sure that they can still travel in Europe, while we're going to be struggling after the 1st of January. So there's always been hypocrisy. There's always been a willingness to say whatever it is that gets passed. I do not really think that there's been a long-term strategy, because if there is, it'd become clear at this stage what it is, outside of it being a no-deal Brexit. The only thing I would say about this, that again, going back to the cause of independence, once Brexit's out the way, 31st of January, which I'm dreading, 31st of December, the European Union, the gloves are off. There's no more discussions with them. There's no more talking with the UK. And I think at that point it'll be much easier for us to hear from countries that are within the EU just now about how if an independent Scotland wants to get back in there, then it should not be a difficult process. And I think that will help us considerably when we're moving forward towards independence next year.
And just before we move on, James, we hear a lot of kind of doomsaying, a lot of sort of nightmare scenarios about what happens if there isn't a deal on the 31st of December. What are the things that you are most worried about happening?
I suppose that the main thing, I think that we'll soon see differences in the shops, but I think the main thing that we'll see in the shops, my biggest fear is over medicines. I'm really concerned that some of the things that we take for granted just now that we won't be able to get with ease after the 31st of December. And for me, that would be the primary concern.
Well, we do move on now. Obviously, Brexit will continue to dominate the news for the next few months, but we do have to move on. And sadly, this week we saw the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, legendary liberal justice on the American Supreme Court, a great advocate for women's rights, or what she described as the equal citizenship rights of men and women. She always said that she wasn't fighting for women's rights, but for that constitutional principle of equality. She died this week. She had metastatic pancreatic cancer, which she'd been fighting for some time. She said, or rather I believe it was her daughter said that one of her last wishes was that she wouldn't be replaced until Donald Trump had been replaced. And sadly, she hasn't quite made that possible. So first of all, Michelle, what do you think Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy will be?
I think that's a really hard question. Her influence has just been in so many waves over so many decades that I think that I can't personally pinpoint one thing. I think that as a modern woman myself, feeling that I have a platform and right to have those inequalities addressed, to have forums, to have those discussions, that's where there's a worldwide ripple. And maybe people who don't understand that, key figures like her who were, bold, and they said the things that were seen to be shocking. When she'd said about that it's only enough when there's 9 women on the Supreme Court, like that like just moments like that in history, because then that gives young girls and women a voice and a platform, and then it's allowed for those infrastructures to exist for us all to then to climb up a level and then take that next step forward together. And that's led to obviously huge legislative changes, it's led to societal changes, and we still have progress to go, and I could take up a full hour going on about it, so I'll be careful. But I think that it's that wider reach. It's not just specific as to what she gave. When I heard that she'd passed away, I was really saddened because it felt like it was such an end to a chapter. But we have a new chapter ahead, and she would want us to leap forward with it.
And James, on the kind of politics of this, famously during Barack Obama's last year in office, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, refused to hold a vote on his nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court on the basis that it was the end of his term and he didn't have the right to make an appointment when a new president would be coming in a matter of months. But now, with 46 days left until the election, Mitch McConnell has said he will bring forward a vote as quickly as he can on whoever Donald Trump nominates. Now, this is going to potentially affect the balance of the Supreme Court for years and years to come. The nominees now are very young, precisely because they want people to be there for a long time and have that influence for decades potentially. How big an issue do you think that is, and what impact do you think this discussion on the Supreme Court might have over the election?
I think that Donald Trump's reaction to her death, which to be fair was sort of gracious when he was told in terms of, oh, she was a great woman, blah, 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 but that lasted for about 30 seconds and then he started to think about how he could make political capital out of it. Is going to damage him, because I think that people who were, if there's any, America looks like an even more polarised society than the UK does just now, and if there's anybody that's sort of like swithering who to vote for, and they thought, oh, here we go, we're going to get a hard right Supreme Court judge, justice, then it might well be that Trump's behaviour will have changed them slightly towards voting for Biden. The possibility is that they won't get it through, although it's a slight possibility, because at least there's been some representatives, Republican representatives, saying that they think that it should be after the election, see who the president is, and then let the decision be made at that time. But it's very worrying, because the place the Supreme Court holds in the American society is so important that if we fill it with right-wingers, then America can become a horrible place. But the thing is that 2 of Trump's appointees have let him down in some of the big laws recently, the big decisions recently. So that's encouraging that it might well be they come from the right or the left, but some of them are still holding on to that central principle of it being about the law. And if we've just got to hope that whoever goes in sticks to that. I was watching CNN when the news of her death came through, and obviously I knew a lot about her, and I knew she wasn't as well. I knew a bit about her. I knew she wasn't the size of Tuppence, but she'd made a huge impact, and in American society. But to see how the people on CNN were reacting to her death, and it wasn't about the politics, it was about her death, it was quite something, and just highlighted how much she meant.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth bearing in mind that she was very well respected and well liked within the legal profession. I heard a wonderful story that I just want to tell you. Antonin Scalia, the judge who died just at the end of Barack Obama's term, arch conservative judge, and a journalist was once talking to him, and he had 24 red roses sitting on his desk, and the journalist asked, "Oh, who are those for?" And he said, "Oh, they're for Ruth." And he said, "For Ruth Bader Ginsburg, really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "How often do you give your wife roses?" And he said, I don't think I've ever given my wife that many roses." And the judge said, "You should try it." And he said, "Well, you know, what kind of close decision on the Supreme Court has ever been swung by the fact that you bought Ruth Bader Ginsburg flowers?" And he said, "Son, there are many things much more important than politics." And I thought that was just a really nice way to think about how we relate to each other. But speaking of political divides, Friday marked the 6th anniversary of the independence referendum here in Scotland. Obviously, it's been quite a muted occasion. There had been plans, obviously, before the pandemic to mark it in various ways that had to be a bit muted this year. But James, looking back 6 years, I saw somebody on social media say it feels like a generation. What do you think, looking back on the independence referendum, what are the really big memories that you have about how Scotland has been affected by it?
The campaign itself was, for me, a real awakening. I mean, I'd been campaigning for independence for 20 years before the referendum, but to see everybody else join in, if you know what I mean, people who weren't interested in politics before, young people, school children that were starting to talk about Scotland's future, was so encouraging. The day itself was a joyous day. I mean, I'm Glasgow, so we voted yes. We thought we were going to win it because that's what we had in front of us. You know, people were saying, and they were so enthusiastic. There was queues outside the polling stations that I've never seen anywhere else. It was just unbelievable. It was like there was a pop concert going on in every polling station. And so that whole day was just full of enthusiasm, full of hope. One guy who was 80 odds, he came in with his grown-up children, obviously at that age, and his son said to me, "This is my dad's first time in a polling station." He said he would never ever vote because all politicians are the same. Thanks very much, mate. But he said he's here to vote for Scotland's future, and he's here to vote yes. And I think what the referendum did was it gave people a reason to vote because they knew that their voice counted. And it does in a referendum in a way that it sometimes doesn't in an election. So that was great. The following day was slightly more difficult. I was up, 6 in the morning, had been doing media during the night, got to my bed, 6 or 8 in the morning, got to my bed, couldn't sleep, got up, went to my office. One of my staff, who wasn't particularly political, had been in, and I says, "Let's close the office after a couple of hours." Took me up the road, heard Alec had resigned, and that was the final straw for me. I was just sitting in our car like, oh. And then over the next couple of days, my phone kept pinging, and it was members. It was new members. It was just stunning. And that was the rebirth of the independence movement, was just the couple of days after we lost. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was like a reinvigoration of Scotland, and I think that we're now coming up to the end game, and I suspect that we'll be independent certainly within the next 18 months, or we'll be in the throes of the discussions with the rest of the UK within the next 18 months.
Mm. Well, Michelle, for you, when you look back, as I said, there's been a kind of lifetime of politics during that 6 years. We've had three
Yeah.
UK general elections, the Brexit referendum. When you look back, what do you think has changed in Scotland as a result of the referendum and since the referendum? What do you think that kind of longer term effect has been?
Well, I was a no to yes. I did vote for independence. I'd changed my mind before the vote, and that was down to the activism that took place, that wave that James has just explained. You know, for me, that was a huge moment, and that rebirth. I suppose I'm part with that side of the coin. You know, I joined the party, and you know, when I look back at how many elections I've been involved in such a in that 5 year period, it's just absolutely crazy. But if we look back at the result and sort of what people were saying, and that is what is important about a referendum. I know that the word divisive was thrown around a lot, but I genuinely think that now we're at a point where it's cohesion. It's that the sores of what happened in 2014 have had time to heal over. Yes, there's a scar there, but how do we move forward? What is it that people are looking for? Because obviously there's a will and a want for independence, but that turning into a solid vote outcome is two different things. You know, we'd heard that people being concerned about their pensions, people being concerned about job security. Well, look at where we're at now. Look at what's happened. You know, people are worried about their pensions. Job security, well, you know, what are we supposed to do when we're limited and our hands are shackled so much to the UK government? If we'd been independent, this would have been such a different story that we're dealing with. If only that we had hindsight to see that. That's a totally different thing. The other thing that people made a point of saying is that they wanted to see the SNP govern for longer. They wanted to see local authority areas with SNP councils, which obviously I am a part of in my council role. And we are delivering. We're showing that cohesive working. And I believe that confidence of delivery under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership has been absolutely solid to making that foundation stronger. You know, those initial posts were sort of put in by the Yes movement and by the you know, through the whole time that the SNP's sort of been in existence, but it came to that crescendo point that James mentioned. And then we've sort of built on that from that, and it's not our choice that the UK government have behaved the way that they have. You know, they're the ones that have ignored the vow. They're the ones that are trying to overturn decision making through our devolved processes. That is not something that we, the SNP or the Scottish people, regardless of your politics, have chosen to do. That level of disregard lies on them, and the way that they have, you know, disregarded the Act of Union. You know, Joanna Cherry said it very eloquently. Down in Westminster and during the week there. I think that there's no going back from they've planted their feet in the ground on their position on it, and we have a responsibility to the people of Scotland to do what is best for us. And I agree that independence is coming right now, and the conversation isn't just about becoming independent, it's about what an independent Scotland is going to look like. And the biggest question our opposition need to ask themselves is, what is your voice going to be in an independent Scotland? Because we need to have strong opposition voices as well in an independent Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned polarisation there. And since the referendum, yes, we've seen growth in the support for independence, but we've also seen growth in perhaps the number and the intensity of opposition to independence. We've seen a really kind of hardcore, shut down Holyrood, ban the SNP kind of noises coming out of certain unionist quarters. Do you think the Yes movement, the SNP, the Scottish Government, whoever, has any responsibility for that, and perhaps a responsibility to that group of people?
Absolutely not. No, they are far right minded individuals who have found a concept that they can coin right into because it resonates with those that sit in a similar ilk and thought. It's allowed for them to try and justify their racism. I have to sit on a council group where there is a councillor who has had a link to the BNP, and the Conservatives decided that that wasn't a fair reason for chucking them out. So I have to sit in a room and make decisions in the best interest of the people, the communities that I'm in, with someone like that around the table, which I think is absolutely morally I know I keep saying morally repugnant and disgusting, but it's the two words that come to mind. How can you say that these are people who have the best interests of our nations at heart when really that they're more concerned about flag waving? I know we get that on the same side, people saying, oh, these are just flag waving nationalists. No, we're not. And yes, I understand that on any movement to either side, to the far extremes on the outsides of it, there are going to be people that we disagree with. However, we are not responsible for them and the way that they choose to manipulate what is something that is wholesome and good and meant well for our whole society. And it is not our responsibility to engage them. We will put out any information to try and engage anyone who's willing to have a conversation. I've had some really interesting conversations with some of for example, the Conservative members that are in the council group regarding the Constitution, and it's well respected, proper conversation. And that's where, we could talk about the impact of social media and how forums like that can sometimes be particularly toxic for such individuals. And these are small numbers of people. I think that's the important thing to recognise here. Very, very small percentage of these individuals are actually in that bubble, but the internet has allowed for them to be heightened and have a further outreach. So it comes across as being more than what it actually is.
Yeah, I think that's probably true on all sides on social media. It does kind of give the loudest voices the biggest attention. James, when you look forward, you said that you pretty firmly believe that we are on a path to independence in the very near future. So when you look forward, what do you think are going to be the big battle lines? What do you think are going to be the things where the unionist side kind of attacks the pro-independence side, and perhaps vice versa?
I think what the attack lines are going to be the same as they were the last time. It's going to be how can you afford it? Whereas Kate Forbes quite beautifully said, can you explain to me how a country that cannot borrow could have a massive deficit? And that's the truth, that's what Scotland is. So it's not a case of we're starting this with a huge deficit. It's a case of this so-called deficit as part of the negotiation process once we voted independence. They will talk about ridiculous things like the currency, because it doesn't matter what the currency is, what it's called. It matters what it does and how we decide who we decide to shadow or whatever. And I think that Andrew Wilson's probably got it about right, that we follow the pound for a number of years until it suits us. He said a minimum of 10 years, but I think that was what he said, and I don't really necessarily agree with that. But you have it until such times as you feel that you can comfortably move away from it. I don't think that the currency should really be an issue. So I think they'll be picking up lots of bogeymen like that. I think our case is going to be very clear that for the last 3 years and more, Westminster have shown the contempt that they have for Scotland. And it's time that Scotland would not have been in the situation they're in over Brexit, would not be in the situation they're in where they're still, some of the decisions we're making over the COVID thing are partly because we're still tied to the Westminster, for example, closing airports and things like that, or testing the airports. So I think that much of what our case will be is look at the difference we can make as an independent country. And that's what it's all about. I mean, Michelle says that, it's not about being independent, it's about, that's not quite what she says, I apologise, but it's about what sort of country we want to be. We've all got different ideas about what sort of country we want to be. For me, the important thing is that we get to the position that is us that decide, and then we are the country that the people of Scotland want. Just now, what we are doing is we are trying to create the country that the people of Scotland voted for, but we're not really capable of doing that because we're being told by others who are holding the purse strings that this is not what they're willing to accept. So we're always battling against something that we shouldn't have to be battling against. So I'm very confident because I think all the good arguments are on our side, and the people are coming over to us, and I believe that they'll come over to us in bigger numbers the worse that this government gets.
And Michelle, you are, of course, hoping to be a candidate for the election next year, which means that you could very well be in Holyrood helping to make all this happen. What's your feeling about how the that campaign is going to look in terms of what the case will be, and how confident are you that a referendum can happen and be won next year?
Well, the right to self-determination absolutely has to be the riding factor here. We can't just continually be seen as an ability to mitigate for the UK government. You know, we are a party of government. We're not there to mitigate. I mean, how many times do we have to say that? In terms of the campaign itself, obviously the Social Justice and Fairness Commission are currently consulting on their health and wellbeing paper at the moment. And I think that having that vision for an independent Scotland and the social justice for our communities and societies is absolutely fundamental. However, we can't just ignore the fact that we have those issues already exist in our communities, for example, homelessness, poverty, we could, job security now more than ever, our health and wellbeing because of COVID, mental health has obviously become a huge sort of stance, in particular in relation to COVID as well. And that's not even starting on the waiting list and the impact that I've obviously spoken about previously. When it comes to the campaign, we have to indicate and show that independence will deliver us being able to deal with these things. It's a simple message. But our communities absolutely need to be at the forefront of it has to be individualised and central at the same time. So that is part and parcel with that conversation and sort of the lead to the independence referendum. As to when that will happen, I absolutely agree with James. I think it's going to be within that time frame. If you don't see it's coming already, then you're not paying attention.
Well, that does seem like quite a place to end. We are just about out of time now. So thank you very much to Michelle Campbell and to James Dornan for joining us. It's been a really interesting show, I think. And thank you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in us making these shows at all if you weren't with us. So we do have to ask, though, if you're able to support us, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is what keeps us going. That's virtually our only source of income. So if you're able to support us, it does make a big, big difference to what we can do here. If you're not able to support us financially, we absolutely understand. We've talked already today about how furlough, for example, is about to end. So you can still make a big difference, though. You can follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can find our Facebook page. You can find our YouTube channel, subscribe there, and also click the bell icon while you're there so you get notified when a new video goes up. And then please share these shows around with your friends and family. Let them know why you support Broadcasting Scotland. Obviously, in the wake of the BBC's actions this week, a lot of people have cancelled their licence fees and may well be looking for something different. So do let them know where we are and what we do. We would love to have you help us grow that audience. And finally, if we are going to be looking at this election and potentially a referendum next year, there is going to be a lot of news to cover, and we're going to need more people to help us do that. Whether it's covering counts around the country, we need correspondents everywhere, as well as people here in the studio to help us do everything that happens here. So if you're interested in getting involved, then do please get in touch with us. It takes a lot of work to make TV programmes happen, and we do it on a skeleton staff just now, especially during lockdown. So if you're interested in getting involved, either in front of or behind the camera, wherever you are in the country as well, you don't have to be in Glasgow where the studio is. Wherever you are, you can help us out. So do please get in touch if that's something you're interested in. But that is absolutely all we have time for. So once again, thank you very much to Councillor Michelle Campbell and James Dornan, MSP, for joining us. I'll be back on Tuesday with Scotland at 7. Gordon, of course, will be here as normal tomorrow. But until then, have a great day. Goodbye.